Coming up next, Webster.
Good morning. There is serious concern that the downturn, the recession, maybe the depression in Canada is going to hit very hard this year. It might hit even harder in Ontario and Quebec than in the West. But to look at the situation this morning, I've got two men deeply involved in what happens to the economic climate of British Columbia. Jim Killaird, President of the BC Federation of Labour. Bill Hamilton of the Employers' Council of British Columbia. Later in the program, we're going to meet a man from the Palestine, they call it the Palestine Information Office. I think it's the PLO, and his name is Abdullah Abdullah. But first, a serious look at the economy after the failure of the Federal Provincial First Ministers' Conference after the break. There is some demand across the country, especially in British Columbia, for wage controls in the public sector. At the failed First Minister's Conference in Ottawa yesterday, Trudeau laid it on the line. He said, look, you people in the provinces have got power to control wages, indicated he has too. Let's put a freeze on at certain levels in public sector wages. And of course, they said no. Just watch what Trudeau told the First Ministers yesterday.
The problem of public sector wages was raised by some premiers in their presentations to the conference. For that reason, and because the provincial governments have jurisdiction over prices and wages, the federal government responded to these concerns with an important proposal during our discussions this week. We suggested that together, the 11 governments which should be providing economic leadership in this country, together we take a bold step and encourage a moderation of the wage settlement trend which threatens our long-term economic security. We proposed that both levels of government agree on a temporary public sector wage guideline which would serve as an indicator for the whole economy and would provide leadership to the private sector. We propose that the earnings of those making over $50,000 a year would be completely frozen. So those who were concerned about some announcements in the past few days that some of the higher officials of the federal government were getting big increases, anyone over $50,000 would be frozen, not 1 cent increase. Those below 15,000, the other end of the scale, 15,006, would be granted increases equal to the rate of inflation to make sure that they wouldn't fall behind in their purchasing power, as they have fallen behind in the last few years. We would make sure that those at the lower end, those least able to make the sacrifice, would have wage increases equal to the rate of inflation. And those in between, well, they would be limited to a graduated series of increases depending on income, going from full CPI compensation at the bottom to zero at the top. This proposal, it grew naturally from our concern for fairness and for an equitable sharing of the burden of fighting inflation among all Canadians. What was the answer of the premiers? Nearly unanimously, the answer was no.
No, no, no. except for Bill Bennett, who has indicated quite clearly that he's in favour of, he's not presently preparing wage guidelines for the public sector in British Columbia. And presumably the Trudeau freeze now rejected would have applied to MPs and MLAs all across the country. Now here's a man in the centre of the coming storm, Jim Killaird, President of the BC Federation of Labour. Mr. Killaird, how do you respond to that apparently tough move? It's been rejected, but was it a good idea? Should it still be implemented?
Well, I'm somewhat sceptical because of the whole history of Pierre Trudeau, and it was another piece of slick showmanship. He's got the authority. He's the government of Canada. They can do certain things. And yet, you know, they talk about throwing the onus onto the provinces, and frankly, we went through wage and price controls, and they were wage controls. They were an absolute fallacy. They didn't stem inflation. They did nothing to improve the economy of the country. And yet he's coming back again. He's going to go bash with some form of restraint. It's easy, as I say, it's slick to say stop those people or freeze those people that are over $50,000 a year. But, you know, I'm just very skeptical of the man, and quite frankly, I wish he would retire.
Would that be a good move, though? Would it in any way, from your point of view, if you go to the 50,000 level and say, okay, they can look after themselves, inflation or no, in the public or even the private sector, and said no more?
Yes, simplistically, I guess it would be a good thing in that sense. But, you know, I think that you're going to get turmoil throughout the whole society that we have, all the principles that we stand for. I think there should be protection for those people that are in the lower income bracket. But, you know, that's not going to solve in any way, shape or form the chronic unemployment and the movement of our economy. Turning round and bashing on the issue of wages is not the answer.
Mr. Hamilton, you saw the proposition. You know how he responded.
The kind of numbers that Trudeau has, it seems to me, are not, not impossible, not irrational, probably not unreasonable. But what worries me about it is the arbitrary approach that we are going to, without any discussion, without any debate, without any real examination, we're going to make this decision and we're going to drop it on people. And the government always has the power, in the final analysis, to pass legislation and determine what shall be.
The federal government?
Yeah, the provinces as well in this particular area have that same power. Guidelines, yes. In other words, you establish, you say, well, this is what we're the target. But surely it seems to me we should have negotiations first between whatever the labor group is and the government. And then if it comes to the point where in the government's view the economy is going to be seriously damaged and there is no meeting of the minds, then I think you can begin to consider this kind of, what really is the last step.
Well, do you agree with Jim Killaird that this is another piece of slick showmanship, because he has the power now, of course, to impose that public sector wage guideline on all of the federal employees?
I would think yes, and here's why. When you've spent 3 days in Ottawa talking about all these things, and in the last hour, as I understand it, you bring in this particular element of the piece and drop it on the table, I think that is, that's showmanship. That really doesn't give you an opportunity, even with the premiers, to examine a proposal intelligently and try to work out whether it's going to be acceptable or not.
And at the point that I would agree with Bill on is, why all of a sudden the public sector? Why in that forum? Surely if we're going to go together as a country to do something about the economic problems that we've got, surely you talk with those components of society, labour and management, and have a full discussion on this thing. You can't just drop something an hour at the end of a conference and say that's the way it's going to be, because if that's the way the country is going to be run, I think we are in serious trouble.
In other words, you're headed for some kind of benevolent dictatorship.
And, there's one other point, too. You really cannot freeze any one sector of the wage pattern. If you take your people over $50,000 in the public sector, for example, they're all your leaders. Now, we may not like them, we may think some of them are inept and this kind of thing, but outside there, leaving other areas free, salaries, wages are going up, and the first thing you know, there's a gradual drift away from the public sector into the private sector of the good people. The dumb ones, the bad ones, remain there. So you just gradually diminish the effectiveness of the public sector.
Therefore, we have another area of agreement, I think, maybe, Mr. Killaird, in that you would go with Bill Hamilton and say, no matter what must be done eventually in the final analysis of the nations on the verge of crumbling, first you must talk.
There must be consultation. There's no question or doubt about that. And I share the apprehension that has been expressed here by Bill on the basis that I remember Trudeau going to through the media, television, appealing that the national issue was one of inflation, and they brought in wage and price controls. When they brought wage and price controls in, it drifted all over the place. There was tremendous problems in trying to implement it. It was only wage controls. And, you know, to drop this kind of thing here right now, it's just
And after wage controls, as I recall, we got involved, and it's going to haunt us this year again, with catch-ups, correct? Did they help to fuel inflation?
Of course they did. All you've got to do is look at the resultant collective agreements subsequent to wage and price controls.
But, Bill, as you as Employers' Council representing a lot of big power in British Columbia, do you not regard the union's attitude at the moment, oh, here I go, provoking again.
No.
do you not regard the union's attitude as one of intransigence? When you hear the BCGEU, as Fryer told me on this program, going for 25%, don't you think there's got to be clout to stop them?
Yeah, and you see, this, it seems to me, is the area where perhaps disagreement may begin to emerge, because
Hey, what did you say?
I guess Jim was saying you probably will emerge.
It sure as hell is, he said.
Because I think we're facing a situation. We can talk about the process rationally, but when you come down to the actual wage negotiations and what people are going to take home in their paycheck, then the pressures really begin to emerge. And I think we're probably entering a period where, because of our economic circumstances, because of the rising expectations, constantly rising expectations, those are going to have to stop, and we're going to have to look very hard at whether we in Canada can continue to maintain the kind of pattern we've had and the kind of wage increases we've had, when in most of the world they're far less than we are. In England, for example, I see that they're shutting down the rail operations once a week because they're demanding, unless it was a newspaper misprint, I saw a 3% increase being demanded, and that this wasn't being given, and the rail workers were shutting down the rails.
But there is no trend in British Columbia, is there, Jim, like there has been in the United States under Reagan, or in the auto industry in Canada? No trend whatever for unions to say, okay, we want to keep the jobs, we're prepared to negotiate status quo or a cutback. None at all.
No, and why should we? Let's, you know, everyone is developing just off in this direction to start bashing labor. Labor is not the total cause of inflation in this country. Scientifically, it's even been measured. You know, there are other things that have caused problems of inflation in this country. It certainly isn't the wage increases that people have been getting at the bargaining table, and I think that's what Trudeau is diverting at the present moment. He should look right into his own doorstep to how that government's been running this country, how they've been spending money, and that goes to all of the governments across this country.
But can we afford in the public sector or any sector in BC now that 16%, which has been the average in the last year?
Public sector employees in British Columbia have been under the gun for quite a long time, and their wage increases have not been the inflationary factors that's causing the economic problems of this country. And I'll argue with anyone on that issue. I heard Bill yesterday on the radio, even in his very exaggerated conservative position of 40% was attributed, I believe, to the cost of inflation, to wages. What happens to the other 60%?
What happens to the other 60%?
A lot of it's imported from outside with our commodities. A lot of it is the cost of capital in the form of interest rates and this kind of thing. Wages, I agree with Jim, wages are not the only thing which is a part of inflation, but wages are part of the problem.
But non-productive public sector wages play a bigger part in your mind, do they not? Feather-bedded, non-productive, heavy services, some of which you'd like to cut out.
I think I'd rather say public sector. What I would rather say is feather-bedding everywhere. We've got a lot of union contracts, and they're not only in the public sector, where they put clamps on the ability of management to manage, where because a fellow belongs to a certain union, he can only do that particular work. If he's a steel worker, he can't go and paint. And in the construction industry, for example, this is very apparent. If you can move people around and have them doing various jobs, don't have all those restrictions, you know, you can be much more effective, much more productive.
Why don't you go and ask the Royal Bank of Canada and the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, why don't you ask those big corporations to be making the record profits? Why doesn't the government move towards those areas to get some money for this country?
If it's not a racist remark, well, two blacks don't make a white, do they? Well, this is good.
Yeah. You know,
I appreciate 80 billion. The bank's profits are totally obscene. But we're told by all the economists that artificially lowering the interest rates is no help to us. Is that right? Well, let me take a break first. We're going on too long. Before we get back to the main topic, Jimmy, do you want to go into this business where Bill Hamilton was saying that these union contracts, which they agreed to, the employers, are a great handicap in feather bedding and the inability to move men about in contracts? Is that a big deal from your point of view?
No, I don't even recognize the argument. I think really you can go into so many specifics, but I think that we have a good, viable workforce in British Columbia by any measurement, whether it's the construction industry, manufacturing, mining, or in the public sector. I think that the directed criticism against the collective agreements and the workforce that we've got in British Columbia is grossly exaggerated.
Let's look at British Columbia now. Well, you disagree on that one.
I think we've got a good workforce in British Columbia. I think it's a highly educated workforce, higher than any other part of Canada. But productivity, and this is maybe one of the things we should look at, Jack, just for a moment. You see, productivity is at the root of this whole thing, because unless you produce more with the same number of people, then you don't improve the standard of living one bit. If you just increase the number of people to increase your production, everybody gets the same. And productivity in Canada has been going all to hell.
Oh, you're to blame for the lack of productivity.
Part of it
management.
There's no doubt about it. Part of it is management, and as you pointed out, many of these restrictive items in the agreements have been agreed to by management. But I just do make the statement, and we don't want to belabor it to death, that one of the things which is holding back in productivity improvement, very definitely, are restrictive elements in a whole range of wage agreements.
Well, you know, we often disagree on this issue, but you know, the measurement of productivity. So a corporation or an enterprise has a particularly profitable year. It has a large percentage increase. The following year, it has a moderate increase, and it only has a moderate increase on productivity. They never take into consideration about the years in which things are gallop ahead. And the measurement that's taken, I think, is a distorted one. And it's not the factor that comes back to straight directly onto labour. There are many things that go into that formula of productivity. It could be the old equipment, the old style of operating. It could be the amount that's taken out of the system. You know, if there's any one observation that I have about everything that's going on in this society right now because of our economic ills, is that yes, there is too much being taken out of the system, but people are directing the question that labour is taking too much out of the system. And, but I say, what about looking at the other part? What is management? What is government? What is the taxation take out of the system?
But is Labour prepared to accept, for instance, supposing, it wouldn't be prepared to accept, supposing though, how bad is the situation now, first of all in Canada, in a word or two, as far as you're concerned? When you look at Ottawa, you look at Quebec, you look at Ontario, you look at the auto industry, then you come west to BC where we've got 25,000 woodworkers out. Even the unions are laying off officials because the dues are down.
Okay.
Give me a capsule of the state. How close are we to the verge of a 1929 collapse?
Not close. It's bad. The situation is bad. It's not terrible. You talk in terms of employment, unemployment. We have about 8%, just over 8% unemployed. We got 92% employed. 1929, it was about 1/3, I think, at the very worst, in the 30s, unemployed. We're not going to have a 1929 situation. We are going to have about 6 months of very unsatisfactory conditions from the viewpoint of employment, profits, and everything else you can look at.
Jim?
Well, I think that we are in tough times at the present moment when we have 1 million plus unemployed in Canada, and I think it's an awful lot more than what the papers are quoting because of people who don't even qualify to be a statistic nowadays. I think it's worse in some areas of central Canada, but in British Columbia we have one particular industry that's really been chronically hit, and I think it's one of the sad things that we have. We've talked about a planned industrial strategy, one in which we can cushion jobs from manufacturing to the basic industry and so on. And here we have the forest industry. It's hit chronically right now with 20-odd thousand people unemployed. I think that's a kind of a tragedy, and you know, it's going to reflect itself throughout all of the.
Well, that's the free market system. They can't sell it because the Americans aren't buying it, right?
But I disagree with the free market system that we've got here
You
at the
want to
present
control
moment.
the economy.
I want to control with an industrial strategy and bring secondary industry into British Columbia
But you
and
still
create
can't sell the
jobs.
lumber.
Look, that's true, and that's why we've been talking about we're reflective to a large extent of the American economy and Reaganomics, if you want. If the housing industry was going in the United States, instead of putting billions of dollars into disarmament and
armament,
that kind of thing, we would have full employment. We would have the forest industry people working.
Now, here's where you two, and we're just looking at this soberly and moderately this morning, come to a party in the ways. Jim wants a controlled economy, NDP style.
Yeah.
And I don't.
Industrial strategy.
And I certainly don't. You can have an industrial strategy. Now, you know, let's not mix up these two things. You can have an industrial strategy. You can do good planning, but you don't have to introduce a whole series of controls, directives, and this type of activity to achieve an industrial strategy.
Well, you know, Bill says that, and they say that the free enterprise system, the open market, is going to solve our problems. It's got us into serious trouble right now. And, you know, one of the things that we're talking about in the labour movement is that we still, at this present day, are getting logs dumped onto boats and shipped over to Japan. You know, that's no planning into that type of thing. We should be creating that second industry here in British Columbia.
All right, now, let's look at the BC economy a little more closely. What are the big agreements coming up for this year?
Well, we've got the construction industry, there are the hospital employees, we've got the government employees.
These are the three major ones.
Three major ones.
Until the end of the year, yeah.
Now, what about the CLRA negotiations? Will they be just straightforward money package negotiations, do you think?
I see them as just straightforward old line negotiations on which the money package and maybe some odd fringes, but essentially they're very normal negotiations. There's nothing out of the ordinary,
yeah,
really.
but they can always pass it on to the customer and let inflation take its course and the customer pays and building drops off, right? That's what happens in that industry.
That's the theory, although that is built. And remember one thing, Jack, the construction industry today is in real danger, as I see it, on the unionized, on the organized sector, where these changes are taking place. In the United States, the organized sector of the construction industry has fallen off dramatically because because their costs got up to a point where people who are not organized came in and bid the jobs away from them.
Do you think unions are prepared to strike and be tough this year when they know the economy is going down on the slippery slope? You know, who wants to strike when everybody at the moment is in a reasonable, not everybody, but good union contracts are on a reasonable level and have largely kept up with inflation?
The way you're sort of portraying it, you think you're feeding the business agents in raw meat and they're going to unleash themselves on the community.
I don't mean that.
We look at this thing very carefully. We understand we're going to have to keep our people fully employed. But, you know, the construction industry is working quite well at the present moment. And it always uniquely does during downturns.
Wage settlements in BC have doubled in the past 3 years. Can it continue to go on like that?
My answer is no.
Your answer is?
Let me answer it in a different kind of way. There's an interesting comment that was made at the First Minister's Conference that each one of the premiers said, I have talked to Labour and management and here is my idea of what should happen in their particular community. We didn't have any discussions here in British Columbia. You know, we seem to have someone making the decisions for us and maybe making the mistakes for us as well. There has to be, as we've said from the very outset, consultation with organised labour, consultation with management, with government if they're going to make decisions. And that's where a planned economy comes.
All right, as it moved, seconded and carried by you two people, with me as the chairman, the one thing Bennett should do now, before he brings in any fancy legislation in the budget, is to sit down with the employers and the unions and air it thoroughly, if in private.
I would agree with that.
You?
No argument on that.
After the break with Jim Killaird and Bill Hamilton. Yeah, I would hope that any freezes would apply to the university faculty. I'm just going to grind my own axe for the moment. A great little exchange between McGeer and Peterson. UBC wouldn't come. In which McGeer was saying, you set up the binding arbitration. Your guy gave 21% and they're now the highest paid faculty more or less in the English-speaking world. And of course, the UBCs, the universities don't respond to that in any effective manner. However, what's good in the economy, if anything, now? Because I'm told, and all I do is talk to people, that the coal deal is going to save us. And the other side say the coal deal is going to ruin us. We're giving away our coal to Japan. It supplies extra jobs. It's going to bankrupt British Columbia. Is the coal deal the bright spot or the black spot on the face of British Columbia?
I think coal at the moment is the bright spot, and I think you've got to break it into two parts. First of all, there's the coal we're now producing and selling.
Southeast coal.
Southeast coal, and that's one of the commodities which seems to be flowing, not growing, but at least maintaining its normal flow. When you look up at Northeast coal, boy, you got an awful lot of dollars to go in there for infrastructure, for developing it, but then you have a steady flow of income and a steady flow of jobs with 15-year contracts, and I think they're going to grow. I think it's a good deal.
But Shell BP pulls out.
Beg your pardon?
Shell BP pulled out of that. They said, no, it's not ready yet. There aren't enough contracts.
Sure, you're not going to have...
Denison are out trying to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. Are
That's
we
right.
going to subsidize? Is it right that we should subsidize it as taxpayers to create the jobs?
I don't think, as I understand it, you're not subsidizing Teck and Denison. They'll build their mine, and they'll use their money to build the mine. What you are doing is building infrastructure, a railroad into the place, you're building a port, and all these things which are then going to be available not only to them but to anybody else that comes in and mines coal, and there's a lot of coal up there to be mined.
Well, I suppose, Jack, I agree that if under the system that we've got, the coal is a bright spot. There is going to be a lot of development, and I happen to be on one of the committees that's working to try and improve the industrial relations up there with. And, you know, it's not just BP. There are many organizations and corporations that are looking at the development of the Northeast, and it's going to be a fairly substantial expansion. I'm just apprehensive that there's so much of taxpayers' money and subsidies going into it. I think it's probably getting onto a sound footing at the present moment, but, you know, I think the whole point really in the Northeast coal is that we're out-negotiated. I think that...
You mean the Japanese whipped it?
Sure, no question about that. I think that greater control, better bargaining agents, if you want, could have done a better job for the citizens of British Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a question of opinion, and really, I'm not going to debate it because Jim may be right, may be wrong. You're not going to know until you're well down the road.
But without the coal business, we wouldn't really have a bright spot in our bulk economy at the moment, would we?
That is correct, because the minerals are down and the forestry is down. No, we're in real trouble in those areas.
But there is an interesting aspect, and I think it's a bit of a gauge, and that is that the construction industry is working at full tilt at the present moment, and that means that people do have confidence. They are putting money and they are expanding within the different communities, and you know, while I'm apprehensive about our basic industries and the amount of people that we have out of work, I think that in the long haul, you know, I've got confidence for British Columbia.
But as long as the transfer payments, the unemployment insurance and whatnot stays healthy, surely we can overcome, without too much suffering, these international drops in our markets, eh?
Well, you know, you can go into another subject altogether, which I think that where hardship is experienced, and it's probably the standard of living and the cut that we're taking, it's the whole question of interest rates and homes and, you know, the housing of people. And you can't expand a community if they can't live in houses. And I'm apprehensive about that particular.
And if you had your way, you'd artificially reduce interest rates, at least for housing for Canadians in this country, would you?
Jack, I make no pretensions about having any expertise in the field of economics. All I know is that the interest rates that we've got at the present moment is causing us somewhat like chaos. And it seems if government's got a handle on it, they should be looking at our domestic resolutions first, and we should be looking at, if that's one of the answers, let's try that. Because, you know, there are some of the soothsayers in the economic field saying that high interest rates are the wrong way to go, we should go with forced lower interest rates. Let's try it, because we're on a roller coaster going to hell at the present moment.
It would seem to be a reasonable idea to supply funds for buyers of houses less than a certain fancy price, say $100,000 for argument, at lower interest rates. Why couldn't we do that, Bill, and create some activity and homes and jobs for people at more reasonable prices?
Your government can, you know, you can take a narrow slice of the market like that, and you can subsidize your interest rates for that particular community. As a matter of fact, British Columbia did that, as I remember it, 2 years ago.
$200 million, one shot, 3-year mortgages, through the credit union.
That is correct. And you had you built about
Bennett
40.
did it. You got to
yeah.
give him credit.
You built about 45,000 houses instead of the normal 30,000 houses in that particular year, if my numbers are right. But when you're talking about broad interest rates, you see, I'm in agreement with one half of what Jim Killaird said. I agree that the high interest rates are causing a great deal of pain and suffering. I'm not in agreement with, and by the way, they're not only for homeowners, they're for people who want to invest money, they're for business right across the board, big business, small business. But I'm not in agreement with the second half, which says that we should try to develop a made-in-Canada interest policy and disregard the relationship of our interest rates with those in the United States.
Well,
because immediately we do that, you really do create a tremendous burst of inflation, and from where I sit, inflation is the basic absolute enemy. It's the one thing that we have to control and we have to get down if we're going to get back to some kind of a normal economy.
And as a good old Tory, forgive the expression, you would immediately say that inflation is less desirable than mass unemployment.
Inflation is less, well, wait a minute now then. Inflation is less desirable than mass unemployment. That is correct. And but wait, hold on a moment now. You know, you get these pejorative phrases. Mass unemployment. What is mass unemployment?
$1.3 million?
Eh? No, I'm not at all sure that I buy that. You know, today, and we mustn't lose sight of this fact. You will never be able to bring the unemployment rate in Canada, at least in my opinion, and there are some other people that agree with me, never be able to bring it down below somewhere around 6%. So that really what you're looking at is not, 8% unemployed, all of whom are in disastrous circumstances.
No.
You're looking at, and for every one of these individuals, it's a tremendous personal disaster, and that's why guys like me have to try to keep that in mind, because we tend to deal with a broad picture. We can't forget about the fact that those individuals, it's a disaster. But on a national basis, you've got about 2% of the total unemployment there for whom it is a real disaster. The other are part of
I understand
economic
what Bill is
speculative.
saying, but I don't agree that there should be that arbitrary figure of 6%. I think that the goal and the objective should be one of full employment.
That's about
But surely,
Yeah, but what is full employment, Jim?
But surely, before we get into that, surely the object that we want to, if we're going to hold the fabric of Canada together, is the right to own your own home, the rights to a job. And if you eliminate those sort of objectives and goals that people have in society, you break down the whole fabric. And I think that kind of callous decision is indifferent to the whole Canadian scene at the present moment, and we're going to fight that point.
Yeah. Oh, would you mind if I said the opportunity to own your own home and the opportunity to a job rather than the right? Right?
Well, you're splitting hairs on the issue.
Well,
if there are no jobs available and there's 100 people chasing one job, there
Yeah.
isn't a right to a job under those
There
circumstances.
sure as hell is not the
Not the opportunity.
Not the opportunity. I agree in that.
BC, the year ahead, you're very depressed about the economy and where we're going, correct?
I'm apprehensive about the economy, and I think that there should be steps taken to have consultation with Labour, with management, and the creation of jobs has to be our priority.
And if a reasonable plan were laid out, not committing you might even cooperate with any government if it was really trying to help the situation.
I somewhat object to the point that we would cooperate with any government. We have to deal with some of the roughest employers, and we still manage to get along fine. And, we will deal with this government.
That's a good point. And your view of the economy in BC,
Short term, it's a very grim view. But let's not forget that beyond that, there's real great possibilities. I'm talking about a year out.
Calls to Kim Killaird and Bill Hamilton and Webster after the break. Just one thing I must mention, more for interest than anything else. You've been quoted as, more or less, things are so bad, trouble in the streets. You've been quoted the same way. Where are you fairly quoted on these occasions, each of you? Trouble in the streets because of economic problems and unemployment.
Yeah, if you go back and read the quotation, it was fair, because what I said was simply this. If we don't improve our economy in the course of 1982, we are in some serious danger that we're going to have an escalation of the kind of thing on Parliament Hill at 75,000 guys in front of the Parliament buildings. It was very orderly, well organized. There comes a point when you can't control that kind of feeling.
Well, the quote was all right, except the editorial that followed along and said it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the reality is, and we've had a part of it here in British Columbia, where when social services are cut back, we've had government employees, intimidated with threats at the offices, and people prepared to resort to violence. And that's
You're doing a province, Jim. You're exaggerating it a wee bit.
Well, you know, you talk to the government employees and the people that work in those social services offices and the kind of pressures that they're under.
But look at this.
I only said a continuation of the type of things that we're getting right now, high interest rates, unemployment, the ingredients are there. And that the red light is on, and that the politicians and people should be watching for that.
But neither of you, in fact, advocated a really seriously anticipated trouble in the streets.
Well, no, I don't think we've
Not at the present time.
we haven't got about a
You know,
million
not
off gang
tomorrow,
here in
not
British
tomorrow.
Columbia.
And the other thing, of course, Jack, remember.
That was a good quote. Give me that again.
We haven't got a Bader-Meinhof gang in British Columbia.
Yeah.
Okay, go to the phones. Go ahead, please. Where are you on line one?
Hello?
That's you, sir. Speak up.
Yes. What I'd like to direct my question to is Mr. Killaird.
Right.
He throws the figures of inflation of 6%, 8% around, when in fact that when you look in the...
He didn't use any figures of 6% or 8% inflation.
Okay, no, excuse me, unemployment.
Yes,
Now,
correct, both of them.
when you have those kind of figures, and all of a sudden, you see a lot of jobs in the papers, people are unwilling to take any other kind of a job because they can, get subsidized, so to speak, on unemployment or whatever.
All right, is there an unwillingness to take jobs in British Columbia? The employers complain about it all the time.
Go and ask 25% of those available for work coming out of high school right now that want to get trained. There are all kinds of people looking for jobs right now. And that's just a straight redneck comment that people are not wanting to work in this province.
Well, look, I've been around here a long time, and I've never seen such confusion and lack of use of the proper training of youngsters. We've got all kinds of facilities which I feel are not properly used. Would you agree with me?
Yeah, you're
Would
right
you
on
agree
that.
with me?
Absolutely.
Who's to blame?
Government.
And unions and management.
We have sat down, we've got our ideas, we've put it down in black and white, we're prepared to discuss and direct, but government has got this attitude that they can solve everyone's problem. And I'm talking about the government here in British Columbia, although we do have the same problems in Ottawa. But the facts are that we have successful training programs within the industries, the apprenticeship programs that have been proven over the years, and we're prepared to expand upon these things. If government would get their sticky fingers into action and go in the right direction, then I think we could get proper programs.
Yeah, and another, in addition to Jim's comment, another very important factor is that our educational system should stop creating the illusion that going to university and having some kind of a professional job is the be-all and end-all, and they ought to get around instead to pointing out that today blue-collar jobs, skilled trades, things of this kind are where the good jobs are and where the opportunities are.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to point a question over to Jimmy Killaird.
Right?
According to what I've heard about, some companies have cut back or tried to open up contracts in order to have wage rollbacks. I'd like to have Jimmy's opinion on this. Due to the economy, they figure that they should roll wages back.
Well, I suppose, given the opportunity, employers would like to do that. I mean, that's a constant ongoing process and collective bargaining that we experience when you're at the bargaining table here at any time. I think that where the concentration has been is particularly in the auto industry, and there's been a great highlight on that issue on where they're going and trying to cut down conditions.
Yeah, the only people who've gone for cutbacks in BC have been a couple of Christian labour associations in the interior, right?
My idea, a couple of little Mickey Mouse companies up in the interior there have been getting all kinds of headlines, and they're trying to imply that that's the forest industry, and that's not
Do your
the case.
people want to do that? Do your people want to reopen contracts, any of your major people, and cut back wages?
I'm quite sure that they would like to sit down and talk about the possibility and what they can do in that direction, yeah.
Well, I understand the forest industry people will be talking, not on that particular subject, but they're going to talk about the state of their industry.
And it's bad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of course it's bad.
No doubt about it. I hope some of the middle-sized companies don't go under. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I'd like to speak to Mr. Killaird.
Right, carry on.
Got just a problem here at work where I've just got a 6-day suspension because I refused to do this one job that had absolutely nothing to do with my job. And we've got brothers and sisters that are laid off, and the company, we just had the meeting the other day, which is we're going into deals now where we're going to work.
Which union are you involved in?
Pardon me?
Which union?
433.
What's 433?
It's printing.
Printing pressman. Well,
Pulp and sulfite.
I don't know if you can get into that,
You
Jimmy.
can't, yeah.
Oh, pulp and sulfite.
Yes, and anyhow, we've got brothers and sisters that are laid off, and you're still putting the pressure on us to do 2, 3 different kinds of jobs. I think it's wrong.
That was my in the first place, I think it's unfair to throw the question to Jim or myself in any detail until we know all the circumstances. But basically, that was what I was talking about. Here's an opportunity for a guy to go on and do something else, which presumably would be more productive than bringing somebody else in just to do that particular job. He won't do it.
Your contract covers you, does it?
Yes, it does. Well, see, they applied for it, eh? They put a posting on it, a certain job, but then once you do take this job, they change it around. They start adding all the kinds of different jobs for
I
it.
don't want all the details, but Jimmy might be able to handle that.
Well, I see a particular problem, and it's an aggressiveness that could become negative if management moves in that direction. First of all, we're trying to develop, and we have, a very specialized workforce here in British Columbia. If because of a shortage of skilled labor that management, and there have been massive layoffs, they're trying to have someone jump in and do 2 or 3 jobs, you're not going to have that specialization. And I hope we're not going to run along in this negative attitude that we're going to be in downturn all the time.
But if a guy's in tough times, can he not put jobs together and save money?
But Jack, just one point on that. There is somewhat a psychology. It's there, and
I mean,
people
as
with
I'm
common
getting
sense recognize those.
Yeah, I know. Okay, bye.
You
Go
got
on.
can I just say something here? You got a classic case of this kind of thing right over in McMillan and Liddell in Alberni at the present time. They've got a certain amount of pulp which has come from a non-union mill, and they are a union mill, and their union people are just flatly refusing to handle the pulp. Now, to me, that is not the kind of thing that makes for effective production.
Okay, well, that's a good one to talk about, because there again, that's a somewhat negative position. There is an attempt by management to bring in non-union pulp. It's a new process altogether, bringing in non-union onto a job where union people have been working. And you know, there are practices that should be retained, irrespective of a downturn in the economy. The answer isn't to go and get some non-union company and bring their products onto the plant. That's going to create further industrial relations problems.
But supposing that non-union pulp is perfectly good pulp, produced in a perfectly legal manner, your people will take the position, because it's non-union, we won't touch it.
That's right.
And that, you'd say, is...
That is just the kind of thing that creates reductions in productivity, the whole bit, and it screws up the whole...
yeah,
What does our
operating
discipline tell us? Our discipline tells us that, well, management says, well, you know, why don't you look past some of those conditions in the collective agreements? We'll give you a good, steady job, and we'll keep you on. And you know, just break them a little bit. We're not about to break any of our conditions. The discipline is there, and it has to be retained, irrespective of upward turns or downward turns.
But yeah, you must have been happy with social credit up on the railway deal when they gave this company $500,000 to unionize it. Eh?
Discipline was maintained.
You squeezed them out?
No, I'm not going to get into that.
But the coal deal is going to be all union come hell or high
Common
water.
sense prevailed, let's put it that way,
Yeah.
because there are collective agreements that have the affiliation clause, and were the government to start running and putting non-union people on that job, they wouldn't have got any productivity. And let's recognize that as a fact.
You'd
in British
accept
Columbia.
that as a fact of life in the coal deal.
That was a pretty damn complicated situation up there that doesn't lend itself to easy analysis.
Take a break. I think I haven't spoken to you yet, have I? Are you there?
Hello?
Yeah, you're next. Hold on, please. After the break. We just had Premier Bennett here this morning. We could solve all the problems of British Columbia's labour relations. Maybe clean up the apprenticeship program too and fire a few more civil servants. Not union members, of course. Because when they get laid off...
You can't fire them under the provincial government contract effectively unless they've done something pretty
terrible. You pay them
terrible.
for not working under the contract, like over at Brannan Lake, where they go in and sign in and sign out and collect their wages.
Well, you see, Jack, I talk in terms of apprentices, and I think that people like Jack Heinrich and Bill Bennett are still doing their apprenticeship, and I don't think they're going to become journeymen.
Good crack. Go ahead, please.
Yes, with regard to the upcoming labor negotiations that you were discussing previously, neither of your panelists there saw fit to mention that all the ports in BC could be shut down within a week.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
What's that dispute? I'm sorry.
Longshoremen.
Longshoremen.
Longshoremen,
Not just
yeah.
grain handlers.
It's an interesting one because, and they're always difficult negotiations, and inevitably they've ended up in the Parliament of Canada for resolution, but they're going through the conciliation services at the present moment, and you know, I hope viewers don't take exception on the fact that we don't mention every industrial relations dispute that's pending there, but the longshoreman is an important.
Yeah, the longshoreman is a key one. It seems to me that the tugboats, I'm not sure whether they've settled. They hadn't about a week ago, certainly. Is another one which could, you know, there are 3 or 4 of these.
One of the apprehensions I have, Bill, and we start to talk about various industrial relations bargaining sessions, I had a radio this morning that said the BC government employees are gearing for a strike. You know, they haven't even gone to the bargaining table.
No, I thought that was very provocative.
If you're suggesting that that's an inaccurate report, I'll take issue with you. They sent a letter around saying, save your money. I had flyer on here saying, we're coming off 3/8, we're going to catch up, come hell or high water.
But every organisation has to prepare themselves for the work.
Propaganda.
But for the media,
psychological
the accurate
warfare.
Media to start talking about strikes is somewhat irresponsible, I think.
You're not going to tell me it'd be irresponsible to talk about the possibility of a BCGEU strike, or the possibility of essential services being used in the hospital unions. They only want $3, full COLA, reduction of work week, instant tenure on appointment to the job.
But we have to mature and learn to cross those bridges when we come to them, Jack.
Yeah, one tends to get hysterical, doesn't one? Yeah. Next one. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd just like to say I agree with Mr. Hamilton on his productivity. The British Seamen's Union, where we used to have 48 men on a ship, have lowered that down to 28 or 29 men, and instead of calling them a seaman or an oiler, they call them a general purpose person. And this has created more efficiency there. One other thing I'd like to say is that Jack Davies had a letter in the North Shore News on the 3rd of February stating where Ottawa is giving several $1 million at 6% to Mexico. I can't understand that. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Could I make a little point, Jack? And really, Bill was relating a story to us before we came on the air here, and it was about on that other television station where he was on the journal program. And it was like 1984, where the cameras were automatically trained on them. There was no personnel inside the whole studio. Who the hell are they going to blame for productivity when they've got complete robots running the thing?
Well, they've got complete robots who also sit at desks. But you're talking about
robot personal, Jack.
No, I am. Robot cameras. Is that right?
Yeah, in this particular instance, you know, the cameras are controlled from the control room. They got a little joystick, and there's no cameraman, there's no floor producer, there's not a single person on this particular broadcast that I did in the studio with me. And it's
from here to there.
That's right. You can't see it.
You're supposed to be live and vibrant, looking at a piece of glass.
Yeah, and the person who was interviewing me, of course, this is technological and understandable. The person who was interviewing me was in Toronto. And, you know, they said, now look right into the lens of the camera and imagine you see me there.
But the point, of course, that I'm making is that there are no workers in there, and yet they're always blaming workers for productivity. Who are you going to blame in the future?
Good point. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Hamilton, with reference to the coal deal, Southeast Coal, it costs us $121 a ton to buy it on the lower mainland. This is shipped to the Orient at around $68, $70 a ton. This is not good for Canada. Please revise your opinion on that.
Thank you, sir. I don't think anybody's burning much coal these days, are they?
Well, I guess the answer is that this gentleman would like to buy, you know, 7 million tons of coal a year. I think I could get him a better price than $120.
That's quite a clever answer. You don't mean to be unsympathetic, though.
Eh? Well, I just don't think it really relates to the problem very much.
It's a different type of issue altogether.
It's also a different type of coal.
Yeah, it's a retail.
Go ahead from Campbell River.
Good morning. I would like to know why management and the unions do not get together to help create more jobs, to try and stop the unemployment. I feel that if there were the price and wage controls, it would benefit the people, but they must control food prices, rent, and anything else that the public has to pay out of their wages in order to do so. But I find that majority of the people in this particular area are unemployed. Some of them have not worked any more than 23 weeks, many not even 20, which they cannot collect unemployment insurance. My husband normally works 11 to 11 and a half months, worked 177 days this year in a logging camp, and we still have to pay all the things out of his unemployment insurance that we would if he were working. I think that the large companies, instead of making their contracts in one particular area, like, say, Mac and Blow or BC Forest Products, to a certain country, they should diversify and see if they can bring their products to another area cheaper to keep our people in BC working.
Ma'am, I think that was quite well said.
Well, there's a comment that I would like to make because it does get a little bit into the areas of the responsibility of government. And, you know, one of the common accusations is that labour and management don't get together. I think in every industry, labour and management does get together, even although we don't agree, but we sometimes agree to disagree. Bill with the Employers' Council and I with the Federation of Labour brought together many of the industries to a joint conference over in the viewers area over in Vancouver Island at Parksville. And we drafted up a comprehensive program on the whole question of apprenticeship, skill training, and the manpower requirements for not only the forest industry, but the construction industry, manufacturing and mining. And we put together a fairly comprehensive position, and we put to bed some of the myths that there was a shortage of skilled labour and that we needed a mass immigration of people into this country. We had ideas on training. We've documented that, and we've had people from the universities, Ken Strand helping us, and Clive Lytle, and that document has been in the hands of the Premier of this province for over 3.5 months right now. Both Bill and I have written to him, and we're prepared to sit down with government to talk about these programs. But I guess he's too busy running around getting the Constitution straightened up, or he's...
Just let me get this clear. Management and Labour in the form of the Employers' Council and the BC Fed, with your researchers and your additional outside help, formed a plan to improve economic conditions, training, pointing out the assets.
In one particular area, like, say, Mac and Blow or BC Forest Products, to a certain country, they should diversify and see if they can bring their products to another area cheaper to keep our people in BC working.
Ma'am, I think that was quite well said.
Well, there's a comment that I would like to make because it does get a little bit into the areas of the responsibility of government. And, you know, one of the common accusations is that labour and management don't get together. I think in every industry, labour and management does get together, even although we don't agree, but we sometimes agree to disagree. Bill with the Employers' Council and I with the Federation of Labour brought together many of the industries to a joint conference over in the viewers' area over in Vancouver Island at Parksville. And we drafted up a comprehensive program on the whole question of apprenticeship, skill training, and the manpower requirements for not only the forest industry, but the construction industry, manufacturing and mining. And we put together a fairly comprehensive position, and we put to bed some of the myths that there was a shortage of skilled labour and that we needed a mass immigration of people into this country. We had ideas on training. We've documented that, and we've had people from the universities, Ken Strand helping us, and Clive Lytle, and that document has been in the hands of the Premier of this province for over 3.5 months right now. Both Bill and I have written to him, and we're prepared to sit down with government to talk about these programs. But I guess he's too busy running around getting the Constitution straightened up, or he's...
Just let me get this clear. Management and Labour in the form of the Employers' Council and the BC Fed, with your researchers and your additional outside help, formed a plan to improve economic conditions, training, pointing out the assets. And you each independently went to Bennett, and you haven't had the word in 3.5 months, Mr. Hamilton?
Yeah, since Jim's raised the point, it was a little narrower than that. It really related to skills training, apprenticeship, and this particular area of our economy. And we didn't go to Mr. Bennett independently. Jim and I jointly signed a letter to him asking him to consider the recommendations we had made and suggesting that we would like to sit down with he and his ministers and talk about it. I think that's... Am I correct?
No reply.
No reply.
No reply.
No reply.
After the break. I'm now about to disassociate my guest from the remark I'm about to make. Patrick Kinsella, Deputy Minister to Mr. Bennett. Mr. Killaird and Mr. Hamilton are very important people in British Columbia. You should know that, even though you're from Ontario. And I want you to go and look up that letter and make sure Mr. Bennett sees it when he comes back from the Premier's conference in Ottawa. Now, you're disassociated from that remark. But Mr. Kinsella has been so much in the news lately that I felt I had to draw it directly, because there's tape me in the production center, so that he can see it. It was exactly 60 minutes into the program, if you look at the tape, Mr. Kinsella.
One point, Jack.
You're gonna,
I'm going to be somewhat defensive. I'm not happy about not having a reply. But let us remember that the Premier has been under incredible pressure with and Jim pointed this out as well, the Constitutional Conference coming up and various other things. I would have been happier, however, if somebody in his office had at least dropped us a line to say they received it.
I know, but I'm going to jump. Jim will agree with me on this. Mr. Bennett has clearly indicated there are going to be some form, he's considering some form of public sector controls in his March budget. I mean, when he makes the noises, like the old man used to make the noises, you know it's cooking. And the point made by each of you gentlemen is that you're prepared to sit and listen and talk and guide and advise and consent or not consent, so that he knows where he's going if he does something, even if he hasn't agreed with you, but he knows where you stand on it and where you stand on it.
We've got to get more talking going, and I guess that's we start off as far as Jim and I are concerned at that point.
And I don't necessarily hope that the NDP wins the next election, Mr. Killaird. Not such a credit. I'd love to see a whole blooming organization, but there isn't one. Go ahead, please.
Jack Webster for Premier.
No, sir. I have an attention span of a butterfly. Go ahead, please. Nobody there.
Hello.
That's you.
That's me?
Yes. Yes, speak up. Gladys, have another bash at that.
Hello.
Yes, you're on the air.
Okay, you know, the problem that I see it is that we've got a problem with interest rates. And the Made in Canada interest policy doesn't work. It would seem to me that the federal government could fix this whole thing by just allowing the homeowner to write the interest off of his mortgage payments. If you did that, you'd put a lot more money back into the economy, home starts, home buyers, and we'd be back in business.
The Tories blew the chance to do it. The Liberals won't do it because they need money. Isn't that right, Bill?
Yeah, I think the Tories did have the legislation, did they not, in the House, and it just didn't get passed before they got thrown out.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, please.
Hello there.
Yes.
Okay, good morning, Webster, Mr. Hamilton, and Killaird.
He gets Mr.
The question I have this morning is the negotiated contracts that are signed in good faith, and then when the construction workers have to go up north, and they have to go up north, and then the Liberals come up with a budget that penalise us with.
That's right. Taxable benefits imputed in some of your contract items. Has that been cleared up? Let me ask Jimmy. Has that been cleared up yet?
No, it hasn't been cleared up, and there's been representation made by the Construction Industry Advisory Council to the Minister of Finance on that particular subject, and it's a comprehensive presentation on behalf of Labour and Management, both urging the recognition that the mobility of workers and being taxed on their going out of town, but there's been no response. And really, we haven't talked one little bit about that budget. It's probably one of the most appalling things that's happened to this country in years. And it's interesting that one of the viewers brings a point up right now. It's not only just that one aspect of the construction worker, how he's penalised, it's the many other aspects that are going to hurt ordinary working people. And it's an example of McEachran doesn't know where the hell he's going.
Well, and we've talked a lot about it on the programme, and we covered that as best we could, and we'll be back at it again. But it was a dreadful budget.
It was a terrible budget, and the thing you got to understand, at least from my point of view about the budget, there's probably 3/4 of it which are all right, and they're the big things. But what they did was torpedo the whole thing with a whole lot of itty-bitty ideas and little changes which destroyed the confidence of Labour, they destroyed the confidence of management, and that's what made the budget bad, not necessarily the fundamental thrust.
My thanks to Bill Hamilton of the Employers' Council and to Jim Killaird of the BC Federation of Labour. Very grim, potentially very grim. There's an area of potential cooperation, and everybody's willing to put their best foot forward.
Right? Absolutely.
Thank you, gentlemen. After the break, I'm going to interview Abdullah Abdullah, Director of the Palestine Information Office in Ottawa. Abdullah, I was supposed to have the Deputy Israeli Ambassador here yesterday, but he couldn't make it because of some problem. I think he was sick. This morning I've got Abdullah Abdullah, Director of the Palestine Information Office in Ottawa. Abdullah, how many, is this the Palestine Liberation Office or the Palestine Liberation Organization or the Palestine Information Office?
Well, the Palestine Information Office is an office that disseminates information on Palestine, and of course the Palestine Liberation Organization is the structure of the Palestinian people.
Right. If I were an Israeli, I'd call you a terrorist. Is that correct? If I were an Israeli.
If you were, yeah, it would be correct from your point of view. But if I am, as a Palestinian, I think I'm trying to get back to my property, to my home, and to my family, which has been usurped, which has been occupied forcefully by the Israelis.
If I were a Palestinian, I would say you're a nationalist fighting to recover his homeland.
That's right.
All the same IRA and the British, isn't it?
And the French during the Nazi occupation as well. They were called terrorists, of course. De Gaulle, George Washington was called terrorist by the British.
Anyway,
when he was fighting 2
does
centuries
Canada
ago.
recognize you as the PLO or the PL?
No. Canada, unfortunately, is one of the few. As a matter of fact, Canada is the last Western country that doesn't have any contact whatsoever on the official level with the Palestine Liberation Organization.
What about the United States?
Well, I think they do not recognize it officially on paper, but I mean, they had contacts and they tried to establish some contacts at different levels.
What about the United Kingdom?
Oh, they have an office which is semi-official in there, and recognize the, as a matter of fact, the Palestine office in London never closed down since 1945.
So Yasser Arafat is still your leader?
Oh yes, he is. Recognized leader, and he is the, in his capacity as the chairman of the executive committee of the PLO, is the head of the Palestine establishment.
Are you still conducting terrorist raids into Israel?
We are trying to defend ourselves and trying to end the occupation of our country.
I know, but...
Exactly as the small children who've been, at least the only resort to them is to throw stones at the Israeli military, caused us to say their discontent with the presence of the occupation.
But you do make raids and kill people in Israel. You still plant bombs in Jerusalem.
Well, how about the raids?
Hey.
You know, how about the raids that are implanted against our people, and how about the Israeli state terrorism, which has been conducted against our people in Lebanon, in Palestine itself, and about the torture of the Palestinians in the Israeli jails and all this stuff? Is this terrorism
and
or
vice
not?
versa, I suppose.
It's unfortunate that violence has to be confronted with violence.
It's a syndrome of the world today.
Which is unfortunate. I think if the word is sane, they should look carefully into ending this syndrome.
Are there any propositions on the table now to create a Palestine national state on, what's it, Left Bank, is it?
West Bank.
The West Bank, the West Bank.
Well, any territories. Well, that has been...
in any territory.
Has been a proposal by the PLO since 1977. Has been recognized and accepted by the highest legislative body of the PLO.
But you've got to give the Israelis surely some good credit for getting on so well with the Egyptians and for giving back the conquered territories in the Sinai. Was that not, from the point of view of world peace, a good move?
But it's not peace. It's a trade. It's a barter.
Good
now
barter.
No, it's not that good.
I mean, the Israelis moved out of all these places, gave up all the airports.
When we are talking about peace building in the area, then we have to work towards achieving that peace. Now, Sinai, the returning of Sinai will never bring peace to the region. And because everyone is now recognizing the fact that tension is more and more intensifying, that Israel is displaying more and more its aggressiveness by not only limiting its aggressiveness to the region or surrounding countries, but expanded to the violation of Saudi airspace, by violation of Iraqi airspace, bombarding the reactor.
That was the shocker, wasn't it?
The city of Beirut, which has been bombarded. In one day, 300 people were killed and over 1,000 wounded.
You can't blame the Israelis for all the bombardments of Beirut, can you?
Well, then I should blame the Americans who are supplying them with this weaponry.
Does the Palestine Liberation Organization yet accept in any way the existence of Israel as a homeland for the Jews? In any way?
Of course not. How could I accept that I do not belong to that country, that I do not have any history, any dreams, any aspirations, where my ancestors have been for centuries in that?
I understand.
Accepting the, well, we have to be, I think, more than simplistic in dealing with this question. Now, if we have to accept what has been proposed, that to recognize Israel, first of all, any recognition has to have two proponents. Number one, what are the territories of Israel we are trying we are suggested to recognize? Is it the Israel of the partition of 1947? Is it the Israel of 1967? Is it the Israel of 1982? Or is it the greater Israel which has been put on paper, on record, in the Israeli government platform last year election, that their greater Israel has to be built, and we have been witnessing the practices of building that beyond the boundaries of Palestine.
Now, I never was a great lover of Menachem Begin, don't misunderstand me, but all I'm trying to get from you, is it not a fact that Israel is there and will stay there, and that only a conquering and massacre could wipe out Israel? Is that not a fact of life today?
It's unfortunate.
But it's true.
It is the unfortunate. But we have our alternative to this unfortunate fact.
Good.
Our alternative is how can we manage to live together as people, as individuals, as citizens, as human beings, both together in fraternity and in peace. This is our proposition, and we...
Providing they give up control of the state.
Not necessarily the state. Now, we are proposing even less proposal on this subject. We're saying let the Palestinians be recognized as a people and have their right to self-determination, which has been recognized all over the world.
More with Abdullah Abdullah after the break. We don't have time to go into the whole complex crisis in the Middle East. Just a couple of points. One, what is the PLO's view of, what's his name, Sadat's successor?
Mubarak.
Mubarak. What's your opinion? Is he a traitor to the Arab cause?
Well, we have to see what policies he is going to follow.
Was
the course of
Sadat-
policy.
was
Yes, Sadat was a traitor to the Arab cause. And not only to the Arab cause, but to the Egyptian cause as well. And look what has happened to him by the Egyptian people.
What about the man who is widely regarded in the West as a madman, Gaddafi? Is he your best friend?
He's a leader of an Arab country.
And you support Gaddafi?
Well, he is a leader of an Arab country, and we are not going to criticize one, because if we have to follow even the news reports, we find that he is no mad, but others are mad, who are accusing him of madness. Look what has happened in the United States about the hit team, about the little objectile and all these sort of things. It's sometimes astonishing, but sometimes surprising as well.
You feel the Americans are a little bit hysterical?
I think they are. I think they are, and I think they are unjust, and they are unfair, and they are conducting a policy of aggression, of spreading their hegemony in a region and trying to remove any obstacle, and they're closing their eyes to the reality in that region.
And that there was no Libyan hit team.
They themselves said that there's no Libyan hit team. The Department of Justice, United States Department of Justice, is not us.
And
we never believed in it.
The projectile which hit Bush's car was a piece of stone falling from a building.
This is what they said.
It's quite funny, isn't it? Now, who will take the vengeance against Israel for the attack on the Iraq nuclear plant?
Well, it's not as simple as that, or as limited as that. Now, this is a trend of Israeli aggressiveness and expansion. Israel is against any Arab modernization, any Arab going into the age of technology, and at the same time trying to expand its boundaries, its frontiers, to build the so-called Greater Israel. Now, this is just an example of proof what the mentality of the Israelis are. Now, look what they are doing to the Canadians. They are mad like hell on the Canadians, because the Canadians expressed their interest in having some dealings with the Arabs, having some Arab investment money in Canada, having trade expansion with the Arabs. And now, one of the friends of Israel, Mr. Lalonde, he expressed astonishment in Paris last Friday, because they were beyond reason, saying that the Arabs should have no technology whatsoever, while the Israelis having not only technology, but they're having atomic bombs.
Well, they won't admit it.
They did admit it, of course.
Are we going to sell?
Dayan himself admitted that they had, and
The potential.
No, they had, and they even brought the number 20. There is a dispute about the number of atomic bombs.
I've never seen that.
Well, it was in the late days of Mr. Dayan. He was very...
Moshe Dayan.
Moshe Dayan.
He died recently, didn't he?
He died, yes.
All right. Syria and the
Yes.
Golan Heights.
That's another example. That's another example to say that Camp David did not solve anything, did not bring us closer to peace.
Except with Egypt.
No, but that is no peace.
But I understand the Golan Heights.
Let us understand
for 25 years or 30 years,
I know
shelling from the Golan Heights and the kibbutzim.
Oh, no, you have also to know the reasons for that. Now, you cannot start from the end and forget the beginning. The beginning that the Israelis have been creeping, have been taking bit by bit of the Syrian so-called no man's land. When they go into the no man's lands, of course, the Syrians have to fire at them.
Can this ever be solved? Can it ever be solved?
Oh, definitely.
Without a war?
If there is a goodwill which is not demonstrated on the part of the Israelis, and that is the role of the international community in one hand, and the role of the two superpowers in the other.
It will never happen, no.
Stop. Well, it happened in 1956. When the two superpowers said no to aggression and no to violation of others' sovereignty. If the same principles entrenched in the United Nations Charter and supported by the two superpowers, including the preamble of the 242, that the inadmissibility of acquisition of territories by force, if that is implemented, then Israel has to withdraw from the occupied territories of 1967.
By which time you will have conceded that there is a state of Israel to which they are entitled, despite your overall claims for the homeland.
Yeah, we say
yes
that there are two reasons has to be satisfied. Number one, Israel has to define its territories before it asks for recognition. Number two, that the political aspect of recognizing a state. Well, we are not ready to recognize Israel as long as Israel is a part and a parcel of empire building of imperialistic character.
My thanks to Abdullah Abdullah from the Palestine Information Office. I'll be back after the break. Well, I reckon it's been a good week. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. The only guest I've got lined up so far for Monday is Mark Rose, and then we'll be doing a piece on all this ghosting and imposters getting into our universities at Simon Fraser and elsewhere. 9 a.m. precisely.
Whether you're in a TV studio or in your dressing room, be aware of what you say. Microphones and recorders can be on as part of routine testing, and a casual or flipped comment done in jest could come back to haunt you.
I suppose.
Oh, by the way, your fly is open.
Don't worry, dead birds don't follow the nest.
Right.
It's okay. Look.
Mister.
That's an old Churchillian statement.
But what if a host like Webster wants to talk about something I don't want to talk about?
Well, be prepared. The question you don't want asked will surely be asked. Charm and control are vital. Be nicer than anyone else on the program, and you can't go wrong. Thank God I'm more than just a pretty face.